The child's fingers were bone-thin when they closed around Corporal Hassan Reeves' wrist. He jerked back, instinct screaming danger, his rifle halfway to firing position before his brain caught up to what he was seeing. Not a combatant. Not a trap. Just a kid, maybe 7 standard years, with skin like purple silk stretched too tight over a skull that seemed too large for the spindly neck supporting it. The eyes were what stopped him cold, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, all fixed on the ration bar clipped to his chest webbing. Please. The word came out in universal, mangled by a throat not designed for human phonetics, but unmistakable in its desperation. Please, soldier. Hassan's squad had moved past him, sweeping through the rubble of what used to be a residential sector. The ceasefire was 3 hours old, fragile as glass, and command had been explicit. No contact with civilians, no deviations from patrol routes, no exceptions. The Veyron ascendancy had agreed to humanitarian corridors, but trust was a currency neither side possessed after 11 months of grinding warfare. The child swayed, still gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Up close, Hassan could see the tremors running through the small body, could smell the sour, sweet scent of starvation ketosis. He'd seen it before, on a dozen worlds, in a dozen conflicts. The body eating itself to survive. Let go, kid. He kept his voice level, professional. Around them, the shattered city groaned and settled, dust sifting through gaps in broken walls. Somewhere distant, a structure collapsed with a sound like thunder. I can't help you. 1 meal. The child's translator chip was better than its organic voice, projecting the words with crystalline clarity. 1 meal and I will ask nothing more, I swear on the Queen's breath. That phrase triggered something in Hassan's linguistic database. A ritual oath, binding among the Vaharan. Not something used lightly, especially not by a child. He glanced down the street where his squad had disappeared around a corner, then back at those 3 eyes, each one reflecting his helmeted face in triplicate. The standing orders were clear. Fraternization meant court-martial. Unauthorized aid to enemy nationals meant treason charges. The Alliance didn't do half measures, not in this war. Hassan unclipped the ration bar with his free hand. The child's grip loosened immediately, those eyes tracking the silver wrapper like a targeting laser. He held it out, watched skeletal fingers close around it with a gentleness that suggested either gratitude or disbelief. Eat it slow, he said. Your stomach won't. The child tore into the wrapper with teeth and nails, stuffing chunks of compressed nutrition into its mouth with frantic mechanical efficiency. Hassan took a step back, scanning the ruins for observers. The helmet's tactical display showed nothing, but that meant less than it should in urban environments. Veyron scouts were good, better than human recon in tight spaces. Corporal Reeves. The voice in his helmet comm made him flinch. Sergeant Kowalski, irritated and suspicious. Where the hell are you? Got turned around in the rubble, Sarge? Doubling back to your position now. We're 3 blocks from checkpoint, and I want to be through before some fool on either side decides the ceasefire's over. Copy that. He looked down at the child, who had finished the bar and was licking the wrapper with a tongue that was far too long and far too prehensile. The shaking had eased slightly, but the hunger in those eyes remained. Go home, Hassan said. Stay inside. The fighting's not over. Just paused. The child nodded, a very human gesture that looked wrong on that alien skull. Then it did something that made Hassan's blood run cold. It straightened, brought its right hand to its left shoulder in what was unmistakably a Veyron military salute, the kind reserved for royalty or high command, and held it there for 3 full seconds before turning and vanishing into a gap between collapsed walls. Hassan stood frozen, trying to process what he'd just seen. A child starving in the ruins, who knew court protocol, who spoke universal better than most civilian refugees, who had used an oath that, according to his briefing files, was supposed to be restricted to the royal bloodlines. He was still standing there when Kowalski's voice crackled again. Reeves, I see you on thermal. Stop sightseeing and move your ass. Hassan moved, falling into a tactical jog, but his mind wouldn't let go of those 3 eyes, that perfect salute, the way the child had said Queen's breath, like it meant something personal. Intel had said the Vazarin royal family was off-world, safely evacuated to the inner systems. Intel had said a lot of things that turned out to be propaganda or wishful thinking. He caught up with his squad as they reached the checkpoint, a hastily erected barrier of Alliance prefab and Veyron wreckage. The guards waved them through without inspection, bored and counting down to shift change. Hassan didn't mention the encounter, didn't log it in his helmet recorder, didn't think about the fact that he'd just committed a violation serious enough to end his career. He thought instead about hunger, about protocol, about the strange weight of a child's gratitude. 3 days later, the summons came. Hassan was in the barracks, cleaning his rifle for the 4th time that week, when Lieutenant Moreno appeared in the doorway with an expression that suggested someone had died or was about to. Reeves, with me, now. The walk to command was silent. Moreno didn't answer questions, didn't offer hints, just led him through corridors that grew progressively more secure, past checkpoints that required biometric scans and armed escorts. Hassan's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Someone had seen him, someone had talked. The Varen had filed a complaint. They stopped at a door that was guarded by 2 soldiers in dress uniform, ceremonial rifles held at parade rest. Beyond was a room that Hassan's security clearance shouldn't have allowed him to enter. Moreno nodded to the guards who opened the door without checking credentials. "Inside," Moreno said. "And, Corporal? Whatever you did, I hope it was worth it." The room was small, austere, dominated by a conference table that could seat 12. Only 2 seats were occupied. One held Colonel Vance, the senior alliance officer on planet, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his tactical brilliance. The other held something Hassan had never seen in person, only in briefing hollows and threat assessments. A Varen Royal Guard. The alien was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even seated, wearing armor that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. 3 eyes regarded Hassan with the kind of calm that predators possessed, the certainty of something that had never encountered a peer threat. One hand rested on the table, fingers that ended in retractable claws tapping a rhythm that might have been idle or might have been a countdown. Colonel Vance gestured to an empty chair. "Sit down, Corporal." His hands wanted to shake. He forced them still. 3 days ago, Vance said, his voice carrying the kind of weariness that came from too many briefings and too little sleep, "you gave a ration bar to a civilian child during a patrol through Sector 7, correct?" If they were asking, they already knew. "Yes, sir." "You made unauthorized contact with an enemy national. You failed to report the encounter." Vance's fingers drummed on the table, counterpoint to the V. Heron's rhythm. "Under normal circumstances, I'd have you in the brig awaiting court-martial." Court-martial he could handle. It was the other implications that worried him, the possibility that his stupidity had compromised the ceasefire or given the veteran leverage. "These," the colonel continued, "are not normal circumstances." The Royal Guard spoke for the first time, its voice a deep rumble that Hassan felt in his chest as much as heard. The translator rendered it in flat, emotionless universal. "The child you fed was Princess Shevra, 4th in line to the ascended throne, daughter of Queen Jatira the Eternal. She had been separated from her security detail during a bombardment, lost in the ruins for 6 days." Hassan's stomach dropped. Royal family. You'd fed a princess. The intel had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, and he'd stumbled into something that could restart the war or end it depending on how the Vossaren chose to interpret his actions. "The princess," the guard continued, "was recovered 4 hours after your encounter. She was examined by royal physicians, who determined that without immediate nutrition, she would have entered systemic organ failure within 12 hours. Your ration bar prevented this outcome." Silence filled the room, heavy and expectant. Hassan didn't know what to say, wasn't sure if he was supposed to say anything. Vance leaned back, studying Hassan with eyes that had seen too many battles and buried too many soldiers. "The Queen," he said slowly, "has requested a meeting. With you. Specifically, the Queen is here." The word came from the doorway. Hassan turned, knowing what he would see and still unprepared for the reality of it. She filled the doorway, not through size but through presence, a gravitational force that made the room feel smaller and the air feel thinner. Queen Jatira was smaller than her guard, perhaps 6 feet tall, but she wore authority like armor, every movement precise and deliberate. Her ceremonial robes were deep purple, almost black, threaded with silver that caught the light like stars. 3 eyes, larger and more luminous than her daughter's, fixed on Hassan with an intensity that made him want to look away and hold her gaze simultaneously. Behind her, partially hidden by the Queen's presence, stood the child. Princess Shavira wore robes that were less ornate, but no less elegant, and those 3 eyes met Hassan's with recognition and something that might have been hope. The Royal Guard rose, bringing its right hand to its left shoulder in the same salute the child had given. Vance stood as well, managing a credible approximation of Viharan court protocol. Hassan scrambled to his feet, uncertain whether to salute or bow, or simply stand at attention. The Queen moved into the room with fluid grace, each step measured and purposeful. She stopped 3 feet from Hassan, close enough that he could see the faint patterns in her skin, the way the overhead lights reflected in her eyes like triple moons. She studied him in silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than her guards, but it carried absolute authority. "You are Corporal Hassan Reeves, 7th Infantry Regiment, Alliance Expeditionary Force." "Yes, Your Majesty." He wasn't sure of the proper form of address, but she didn't correct him. "My daughter tells me you gave her food when she was starving, that you asked nothing in return, that you violated your own orders to show compassion to an enemy child." The Queen's head tilted slightly, a gesture that translated as curiosity across species. "Why?" Hassan opened his mouth, closed it, tried to find words that wouldn't sound stupid or self-serving. "She was hungry, ma'am. Just a kid. Couldn't leave her like that." "You could have." The Queen's eyes never blinked, an unsettling constant. "Your orders were clear. Your duty was to your squad, your mission. Yet you chose compassion over compliance. I wish to understand this choice." He thought about the question, really thought about it. Not the tactical implications or the political ramifications, but the truth of that moment in the ruins. "Where I come from," he said slowly, "we've got a saying. In the end, we're all just trying to get home." She was lost. Scared. Human doesn't matter when you're 7 and starving. I just saw a kid who needed help." Behind her, Princess Chevra watched with those same two large eyes, and Hassan saw now what he'd missed in the ruins. The intelligence there, the keen awareness that suggested this child understood far more than her age would indicate. "For 11 months, the Queen said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the room. "We have fought, your people and mine, thousands dead, worlds burned, all because of a misunderstanding over mining rights that spiraled into mutual fear and distrust." She paused, letting the words settle. Neither side has been willing to show weakness by extending compassion first. "We have been locked in a dance of pride and blood." She raised one hand, and the princess moved forward, coming to stand beside her mother. The Queen's hand rested on the child's shoulder, protective and possessive. "My daughter is 4th in line, but she is precious to me beyond measure. When she was lost, I despaired. When she was recovered, I rejoiced. When she told me of the human soldier who fed her without hesitation, who asked for nothing, who simply helped because help was needed." The Queen's eyes seemed to brighten, and Hassan realized with a shock that she was suppressing strong emotion. "I understood that perhaps we have been fighting the wrong enemy, that perhaps our true enemies are fear and assumptions and the refusal to see each other as people." Colonel Vance cleared his throat softly. "Your Majesty, if I may, the ceasefire terms you proposed this morning, are they? This war ends now. Not because your soldier saved my daughter, though that act carries weight beyond measure. It ends because this soldier showed me what I had forgotten, that compassion is not weakness, that seeing our enemy as people does not make us vulnerable. It makes us strong enough to choose peace." She turned back to Hassan, and for the first time since entering, she smiled. It was not a human expression, the mouth mechanics all wrong, but the intent was unmistakable. "You gave my daughter 1 meal, soldier. I give you and your people something in return. Peace. An end to this foolish war. And an alliance, if your leaders are wise enough to accept it." Hassan felt the room spinning slightly, the implications too large to process. A war ending because he'd broken protocol to feed a hungry kid. History pivoting on a moment of basic humanity. "I don't know what to say, Your Majesty. Say that you will accept the gratitude of a mother and a queen. Say that you will witness the treaty we signed today, that your name will be recorded in both our histories as the bridge between our peoples." She paused, then added something that sounded like it cost her to say. "Say that you will forgive us for seeing you as enemies when we should have seen you as potential friends." Hassan looked at the child, who watched him with the same hunger she'd had in the ruins, but this time it wasn't for food. It was for understanding, for connection, for proof that the kindness he'd shown was real and not an anomaly. He thought about orders and duty, about the 11 months of combat and the friends he'd lost. He thought about choosing compassion over compliance, about seeing people instead of enemies. He thought about going home, about everyone going home. "I accept," he said quietly. "And there's nothing to forgive, Your Majesty. We all got lost in the ruins. We all forgot to see each other clearly." The Queen nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals. "Then let us begin again, Corporal Reeves. Let us build something better than what we destroyed." She turned to leave, the princess following, but the child paused at the door. She looked back at Hassan, brought her hand to her shoulder in that perfect military salute, and held it until he returned the gesture. Then she smiled, and despite the alien features, despite the 3 eyes and the purple skin, Hassan saw only a kid who wasn't hungry anymore, who wasn't lost anymore, who had found her way home. The door closed behind them. Colonel Vance let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for 11 months. "Well, Corporal, looks like you just ended a war. Didn't mean to, sir. The best things rarely are intentional." Vance stood, gesturing for Hassan to do the same. "You're getting a commendation. Probably a promotion. Definitely a metric ton of interviews and political headaches. Hope that ration bar was worth it." Hassan thought about 3 eyes in a triangle, about bone-thin fingers, and a desperate plea. He thought about choosing kindness when compliance would have been easier. He thought about a mother who was willing to end a war because someone had been decent to her lost child. It was, sir. It really was. Hassan stood to one side, uncomfortable in dress uniform, watching as the Queen and the Alliance High Command put their marks to a document that transformed enemies into allies. Princess Shavera stood beside her mother, solemn and dignified, a living reminder of why they were all here. When it was done, when the cameras had stopped flashing and the diplomats had started the long work of hammering out details, the Queen approached Hassan one final time. She carried something in her hands, a small crystalline cube that caught the light like frozen starlight. "This is a memory stone," she said, pressing it into his hands. "It contains a recording of this day, of the treaty, of the moment our peoples chose peace. But it also contains my daughter's memory of meeting you in the ruins. Keep it, Corporal Reeves. When you doubt the worth of small kindnesses, remember that they can change worlds." Hassan closed his fingers around the cube, feeling its surprising weight. "I won't forget, Your Majesty. See that you don't." She paused, then added in a quieter voice, "And when you have children of your own someday, tell them this story. Tell them that their father ended a war by refusing to let a child go hungry. Tell them that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight against our own fear and indifference." She left then, her daughter beside her, the royal guard falling into formation around them. Hassan watched them go, this family that had been his enemy yesterday and would be his allies tomorrow, and felt the weight of the memory stone in his hand like a promise. Sergeant Kowalski found him an hour later, still standing in the empty ceremonial hall. "Hell of a thing, Reeves. Hell of a thing." "Yeah. You know the whole company's going to give you shit about this, right? Hassan the Peacemaker. The soldier who stopped a war with a ration bar. You're never living this down." Hassan smiled, still looking at the memory stone. Inside it, he knew, was the moment a hungry child had looked up at an enemy soldier and asked for one meal, the moment everything had changed. "I can live with that, Sarge. I can definitely live with that." They walked out together, leading the hall to its silence and its history. Outside, the sun was setting over the ruins of a city that would be rebuilt now, not by conquerors or the conquered, but by allies working together. The war was over. People were going home. And somewhere in the depths of the Vabrin royal palace, a child who had been lost and starving slept peacefully, knowing that kindness existed even in the darkest ruins, that enemies could become friends, that sometimes all it took to change the world was one person who refused to look away from suffering. Hassan kept the memory stone for the rest of his life. He showed it to his children, just as the Queen had asked, and they showed it to theirs. The story spread as stories do, becoming legend and then myth. The details polished smooth by retelling, but the truth remained, preserved in crystal and memory. In the ruins of a senseless war, a soldier chose compassion over compliance, and in that choice found the power to transform enemies into allies, fear into trust, and hunger into hope. One meal. One moment. One choice that changed everything. That's how the war ended. Not with a final battle or a grand strategy, but with a starving child and a soldier who remembered, even in the midst of conflict, how to be human.